All right. Welcome, everyone. This is our 11th episode of the Spiky Signal Show, where I sit down with some of the most exceptional revenue leaders in the revenue space. The podcast is meant for all of us to explore the biggest problems facing customer facing teams, sharing the real challenges of sales, what revenue leaders deal with every day, from pipeline visibility to coaching to deal velocity. You name it, we all discuss it here. I'm your host, Waleed Sharani, head of revenue at Spiky.ai, and today I'm here with Brad Mirkovich, 6X CRO. Today, we're talking about diagnosing your revenue and how to figure out what exactly is broken before it's too late. Brad, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Waleed, thank you very much. I look forward to the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brad, why don't you just give us a quick elevator pitch on who you are, what you do?
Yeah, Brad Mirkovich. I've been in the technology space for over 30 years. I've been in a CRO type of role for the last 15 years. Typically, I manage the go-to-market part of the organization, which is typically including, sales, business development, partnerships, customer success, support, implementation, and in some cases, marketing. So this information is near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to walking through this in more detail.
Awesome, awesome, Brad. Yeah, likewise. I guess like just a shameless plug, Spiky is all about this one too. So, yeah, I'm gonna be interested to hear what your thoughts are on all of this. So, I guess let's just dive right into, the first question. What's the most surprising or often, I guess, revenue symptom that you've ever seen that pointed to, a much deeper problem, that ends up rolling up into a bigger one?
Yeah, what I've typically seen, so I've started in a lot of companies between sort of 80 million and 200 million, even companies that concur, I started with them at 120 million, and what typically I've seen is companies don't have a great understanding of some of their baseline data. And so what I mean by that is it's really hard to understand symptoms if you don't really have a good baseline of what things should be. And typically when I've come into organizations around $100 million, things are starting to, they're struggling with things, right? Pipeline isn't, they're struggling to build pipeline at the level they want to pipe, but they're not scaling at the level they want to. So really getting an understanding of the baseline information and making sure that that's accurate and everybody trusts it is really the start of doing this. And then after that, then you can understand some of the symptoms when you have a better understanding of what some of the baseline data is. And what I've seen is a lot of companies just don't really get to that point of really understanding the baseline data very well. So that's something where I tend to focus when I go into an organization.
Hmm. Okay. And when you end up going into an organization, what do you do to like kind of uncover that baseline and start setting things up?
Well, one, you got to make sure that the infrastructure has the information that you want. So tools like Spiky, for example, are great in being able to better understand, what's going on in sales cycles, what information is ultimately needed, what information do we want to capture in Salesforce that's important. So all of those things start to really play in there, and that starts also with your annual plan. Like a lot of companies have, I'd say not the most detailed plans. And so then that becomes hard because then what are you basing your numbers on, right? So it really starts in having a plan that is a very detailed understanding of the whole demand waterfall. So, because when we talk about revenue, lead, right, which everyone wants to talk to, revenue is a lagging indicator. So
Yeah.
pipeline is ultimately going to be the dictator of that. And so pipeline, you typically know 3 to 6 months in advance where you're trending on that. And so that's going to then tell you whether you're trending to actually hit revenue targets or not hit revenue targets. So it's tremendously important to have all of that tooled effectively so that you know where your pacing is, and based upon lead source, like, okay, if it's a PLG company and we've historically gotten a lot of inbound revenue, and now we're trying to do other sources, what do those look like? What do those conversion rates look like? So all of that becomes really important in being able to predict what ultimately is going to happen 3 to 6 months down the road.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess like what's the first thing you check when you feel something is off? Since revenue is a lagging indicator, are you going back to like MQLs, for example, seeing how that's performing and then tying that back to, the indicator for revenue. How are you basically like applying forensics to this process?
Yeah. Well, again, so if it starts by making sure that you're actually tracking all of those things and you're tracking the pacing of them, right? Because if you're not, then it gets really hard to understand and go back and do the analysis that you're saying. Assuming that you've done that, conversion rates are going to be huge, right? So what typically happens with a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, is they become very reliant on one sort of lead source. So if you use a PLG company as a good example, they do a lot of paid and organic advertising, get it out there. They're driving a lot of leads, which is great. But then you also need to focus on some other lead sources that maybe aren't so great right now, but so that you have a more, let's say, less risky, pipeline than one specific lead source. Because what typically happens is smaller companies can get to 20, 30, 40, $50 million with one lead source being, very strong. And then what happens is then when they try to scale beyond that, they're sitting there and they haven't spent the time or energy maybe building those other lead sources. That could be, an outbound lead source. That could be sales teams, enterprise reps actually doing some of their own, prospecting. That could be partners driving in leads. All of those things together become really important as the companies start to get bigger because you need more than one, typical lead source to be successful. So really understanding those lead sources, understanding the conversion rates. And when I say conversion rates, there's different ways to look at conversion. So I like to look at cohort conversion. So when it's actually created, so you look at the month that that lead source was converted, and then are you trending positively or negatively? Because if you're trending negatively, then other things have to happen, like your deal sizes have to increase, or you have to be able to close deals faster in order to hit the plan typically that's put in place. So you only have so many levers, typically in a revenue plan in order to hit it. So conversion tends to be one of the biggest ones and one that I would look at. I would look at all the time, and I would say probably gives you a really good baseline of the health of the business.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. Yeah, I've been having similar conversations with other leaders in the space, and there are actually like a couple of common misdiagnoses that they've mentioned. One of which is like poor win rate. Usually, and I'd love to get your take on this. Is that a sales problem or is it more a positioning problem? And then can you tie that back to one of
Yeah,
those
I mean,
conversions?
so if you let's just use a basic example. So a basic example is, let's say we have inbound, we have outbound, and when we have partner. So you have three different conversion rates that you're looking at on three different lead sources. And so now, again, if one isn't tracking at what you want it to, then it's like then now you got to go dig deeper and look at why is it not? Win rate, conversion, sort of similar things, right? Um, I think whenever you pull the covers off on win rate, it's easy to blame sales, right? So sales execution. I mean, I always joked in every job I've been in, like, of course we have sales execution issues. Like, you're never going to be perfect, but you have a track record of conversion with some of those sales execution challenges. Let's assume it can get better, but there's typically more to it. So that typically becomes a more complex problem. So pricing can sometimes be something that needs to be looked at in more detail. This is where I think it's really important to have sales, customer success, and product very aligned. Because to your point, yes, I mean, there probably is some sales execution issues, and those can be evaluated in today's world, especially with tools like Spiky. There's a lot of things that you can do to try to improve the enablement of the sales rep. But I would argue there's also typically more things involved when you're having that issue in particular. It's typically a company issue. There's more things around it. There's more complexity around it, and that's where you have to get deeper level detail and really try to understand what those are, what parameters are playing into win rate going down, and then obviously getting the company behind trying to fix that. Because in my experience, it's typically never been just a sales issue. Like if it was, it would be really easy to solve, a lot
Yeah.
easier to solve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And that's kind of the game that we're in is that, you need to unify kind of this layer between the revenue umbrella, right? You have the sales function, you have the customer success function, product even is brought into the revenue umbrella. But all of these, verticals end up working kind of almost in silos, and they're working off their own cadence and their own data, really. And when one vertical is trying to fix something and the other is fixing another thing, oftentimes that if they just brought their data together and really put their heads together, it's a kind of like an issue that kind of spans across the board. And so, yeah, I totally resonate with that. It's not just like a sales issue, or else it would have been very easy to fix, right? It's kind of across the board. And I feel like a lot of companies today, too, they don't have that visibility, that framework that you were talking about, just having that set up, that baseline, they don't have that. And that's kind of what's leading to a lot of these conversion issues. Um, in terms of like the sales vertical
One
itself.
other point, Waleed, on that, because I think
Yeah.
this is a really important point, is that's totally accurate. The other part of this is from a reporting perspective, what's really important across the GTM org is to get alignment on some of the reports slash dashboards or whatever you want to call them, or however you look at data. Marketing looks at their own data. Sales has a tendency of looking in their own data. Customer success has a tendency of looking in their own data. Product has a tendency of looking in their own data. It's integral to get all four of those groups looking at the same data. And I know that sounds super simple, but it's a necessity, because what will constantly happen is marketing will be like, well, that's not the conversion data we have. Your conversion sales looking at different conversion data. So then you get into these, well, okay, like, because there's in month conversion, there's in quarter conversion, there's cohort conversion. I mean, I could show you 5 different conversion metrics that we could look at, but there has to get alignment between the cross-functional orgs on things that they're looking at, so that you don't have this game of like, I don't like your data, you're not looking at the right data. Because I've seen that. I mean, obviously it's been a sales and marketing issue forever. But that's really important as well, I'd say, to throw into this little discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And I love that you brought that up. Um, Going back kind of to the sales function, um, is there any particular framework that really worked for you and your team over the past, decades that you've been in kind of like the leadership roles? Is it more of a methodology thing? Is it RevOps scorecarding? Is it something else? Like what really worked to kind of set up that baseline? And it could be tooling as well. Like what's working for you for the particular sales vertical?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. So I break them apart a little bit, like, because like a lot of people will bring up Medic. Like Medic is a great qualification tool. It was actually developed by Jack Napoli when I was back at PTC many years ago in the late '90s. And it's a great qualification tool, but it's not a sales process, right? So Medic and some other tools like that. Force Management has some great tools as well, in which you qualify the pipeline that you have. So what Medic does a really good job of is giving you a GPS of where you are, in your sales opportunity. Is it really an opportunity? Is it really forecastable? Those sort of things. So Medic does a great job of that. You still have to have a sales process, right? So there's a sales process, and whether you want to adopt a methodology like Challenger, or there's several out there, Taz, you know, so you want that as well, and whether you're just documenting your own and you're using it and you all agree on it, or you're adopting a third party methodology and training the entire team on it, either one of those is fantastic. So but you have to have that too, because there has to be agreed upon steps in the sales cycle in order to track that effectively from a forecasting method, which that is different than Medic, right? Medic tracks some of those things, but it's not, they're just two different things. And I think some companies sort of confuse the two a little bit together. So I think that having a qualification tool like a Medic or a MedPick is fantastic. You need a sales process and a sales methodology if you want to go to that level. Depends on what you're willing to spend. That's an important part of this. And it needs to be agreed upon and documented. That's the most important part of it. And then the other component is then sort of the tooling and the dashboards and the reporting. And then your tooling and dashboards and reporting should map back to your sales process and include items of Medic. Because if you want your team to actually do those things, then there has to be some relevance. Typically, the best relevance for those things is the forecast, because that's something that they're doing on a weekly, daily basis. And so having reinforcement across all of those, three areas, I think is really important. And I think some companies have a tendency of like picking one, having dashboards that do other things, and they don't tie them together. And I think that's pretty important that you need to tie the three together.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense to me. Um, so it seems like almost like CROs should be kind of labeled as a chief diagnostician or diagnostic person, right? Like you're just kind of uncovering all of these things and really figuring out what's going on and like what are the best practices or gaps happening within the revenue umbrella, and how can you scale that out or even like predict a gap before it even happens, so that way it doesn't impact, ARR or NRR in the long run. Should a CRO really be spending more time on diagnosing it? Or should it be, or should a CRO kind of like leave it up to an AI with all these different tools like Spiky you mentioned, and all these different tools on the market, for those tools to be able to do that, and he kind of just uses that as a check-in. Um, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think one, strong CROs are going to build a culture in the organization of really trying to understand the data, because it doesn't need to be the CRO that does all this, right? There's a lot of people across a lot of GTM orgs that do this every day. But it typically starts with, a CRO that is curious and wants his team to be curious and operate in that format. So I think one, it's creating culture of transparency that, hey, we want to look, we can fail. Like we fail all the time. Like I always tell people, 80% of the pipeline, 75 to 80% of the pipeline we build is not going to close. So we only close 20 to 30% of it typically. So however you want to look at that, we're failing more than we're winning. And now there's a lot to learn there. Those deals are going to come back and all of those sort of things. But you got to remember, like failing is okay. It's part of what we do. So you have to create a culture where people are comfortable with that and they're comfortable at understanding data more effectively and comfortable trying to figure out where the problems are. At the end of the day, Waleed, this is still a people business. So like a CRO can't just sit there and operate, on data analytics all day. I mean, clearly that's a component of the job, but there's a lot of people. You have to have the right people in the seats. You have to hire well. All of those things are tremendously important along with some of the data analytics. So I wouldn't want to try to position that, the data is more important, but data is important. I mean, you can't make strategic decisions from just gut and pattern recognition. I've done this a lot longer than most people, and I've even learned that you can't do that. I mean, those things are important. I mean, I have a lot of pattern recognition because I've been in a lot of companies. I've seen a lot of movies, but every situation is a little bit different. And so you have to weigh that in there, and then the people component, is a really large component of any CRO role. So that's how I would sort of give you feedback on that.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. And I think it really also depends on the size of the organization. I know CROs that are at, startups like Series A, and they act as like a individual seller sometimes, right? And there's no way that type of CRO is going to be the
Yeah.
same as a CRO all the way up at an enterprise, a public company type of thing, right? So I think it also really depends on like, yeah, the size of the company, as well. Um, when if you were to like
Yep. I
pick,
agree with
if
that.
you were to if you were to pick on, kind of like what's the hardest thing to diagnose? Is it new logo growth, expansion, or retention when it comes to revenue?
Um, Again, sometimes it can depend on the data. Like I've been in some companies where we didn't have really good understanding of product usage, and we didn't have great information on our existing customers, and we had thousands of them. And so in that situation, it gets really hard to understand and diagnose, some of the retention and churn issues because you don't have a lot of great data around it. So I'd say it can really go either way, and I've had it on the new business side where they didn't tool from MQL to close very well. So big shocker, they didn't have a great understanding of exactly what was going on. So it's really hard to get in there and diagnose. That's why I go back to like the beginning of this podcast. Like that's the start. I mean, if you aren't comfortable that you have the baselines where they are, or that you trust them, then you have to work to make sure that the infrastructure has, that you build the infrastructure so it's capturing that information. And again, like Spiky is a great example of that, of the ability to capture information automatically and then fill it into Salesforce so that you're capturing the things that you believe are most important to your business that are going to allow you to really understand your business more effectively.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Cool. Well, honestly, Brad, thank you so much. These insights were so awesome. Definitely took away some golden nuggets. I hope our listeners did too. For the next episode, do you know anyone that would be a great revenue leader to bring on here?
What do you want? What do you want to talk about? I got to look at what the. But I'm sure I could give you some people to follow up with.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, anything. Like I said, this podcast really covers everything under the revenue umbrella. So if you have any CROs in mind, CCOs in mind, happy to talk with them, but we can take it offline.
Great, perfect. Yeah, why don't you and I talk offline? I probably have two or three people I think could be great.
Awesome, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Brad, for being on here with me.
Thank you.